After spending my entire retirement fund to help my grandson Preston through medical school and buying him the engagement ring for Ava, I found myself in a nursing home with a broken hip. I planned to give him my mother's antique jewelry collection as a wedding gift, but then I accidentally overheard a conversation between Preston and his fiancée about why I shouldn't attend their wedding. I never imagined at 73 that I'd be starting over from scratch. My name is Gabrielle Wilson, and this is the story of how I learned that family isn't always defined by blood. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Looking back, I suppose the signs were always there. Little moments of disregard, fleeting expressions of annoyance whenever I needed help. But when you've dedicated your life to someone, you tend to overlook the shadows. My late husband John and I took in our grandson Preston when he was just 7 years old. His parents, our son Carl and his wife, died in a boating accident while vacationing in Florida. We were all each other had left. I remember that first night Preston came to live with us. He was so small, clutching his blue stuffed dinosaur, eyes swollen from crying. "Grandma," he whispered as I tucked him in. "Will you stay forever?" I promised him I would, and I meant it. John passed away when Preston was 15. Cancer took him quickly, too quickly for proper goodbyes. I was 65 then, facing retirement alone with a teenager to raise. The life insurance helped, but I knew it wouldn't be enough for Preston's dreams. He had always wanted to be a doctor, talking about it since he was 9 years old, dissecting his science projects with surgical precision. "Don't worry about the money, Grandma," he'd say whenever I looked concerned about college brochures. "I'll get scholarships." He did get some scholarships, but medical school is expensive, prohibitively so. I sold our family home, the one John and I had lived in for 40 years, with the garden I had tended every spring. I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment and put the difference into Preston's education fund. The apartment walls were thin, the neighborhood noisy, but I told myself it was temporary. Preston needed a quiet place to study when he visited from university, so I gave him the bedroom and slept on the pull-out sofa. "You're the one who needs the rest," I would tell him. "Your studies are important." For 8 years I worked part-time, at the local library despite my arthritis. Every extra dollar went into Preston's fund. I canceled my supplemental health insurance. I ate simple meals and shopped at discount stores. When my car finally died, I didn't replace it. Public transportation was cheaper, even if it meant standing in the rain, sometimes waiting for the bus. "Grandma, you're doing too much," Preston would occasionally say, especially after I sold my wedding ring to help with his residency expenses. "Nonsense," I'd reply. "What else would I spend it on? You're my investment, Preston." He graduated with honors. I sat in the audience at his medical school graduation, tears streaming down my face, my heart so full it might burst. Preston, my grandson, now Dr. Preston Wilson. When he spotted me in the crowd, he pointed and mouthed, "This is for you, Grandma." In that moment, every sacrifice felt worthwhile. When Preston met Ava during his residency, I was thrilled. She came from a good family. Her father Mike owned several car dealerships across the state, and her mother Christine was on the board of the city's Arts Council. Ava herself was completing her MBA at an exclusive private university. "She's the Quinnet Grandma," Preston told me over dinner at my apartment. He had brought takeout, a rare treat. "But her parents are, well, they have expectations. The ring needs to be special." I nodded, understanding immediately. "I have some savings," I said. In truth, it was what remained of my retirement fund, the last of it. But the joy on Preston's face was worth more than financial security. The ring cost $18,500. It was more than I had expected, but Preston assured me it was entry-level compared to what Ava's friends had received. I emptied my account and took out a small loan to cover the difference. "You're amazing, Grandma," Preston said, hugging me tightly. "I'll pay you back as soon as I'm established in my practice." I waved him off. "Family doesn't keep ledgers," I said, repeating what my own mother had always told me. The engagement went beautifully. Ava showed me the ring over FaceTime, her delicate fingers displaying the diamond's sparkle. "Preston says you helped," she said, her smile perfect. "That's so sweet of you." Wedding planning began immediately. Ava's parents insisted on holding the ceremony at the Lakeside Country Club, where they were members. The guest list quickly grew to over 300 people. "It's getting a bit extravagant," I confided to Preston during one of his increasingly rare visits. "Are you sure you can afford all this?" "Mike is covering most of it," Preston assured me, though he looked uncomfortable. "It's important to Ava and her family. Connections, you know? These people could be future patients, colleagues, investors in my practice." I nodded, though I didn't fully understand this world of strategic socializing. In my day, weddings were about family, faith, and celebration, not networking opportunities. 3 months before the wedding, I fell in my apartment. The super had ignored my requests to fix the loose carpet near the entryway, and my hip didn't stand a chance. The surgery went well, but at my age, recovery would be slow. When the hospital discharge coordinator asked about my living situation, I had to admit I lived alone in a walk-up apartment. "You can't return there right away," she told me firmly. "You'll need temporary care in a rehabilitation facility." I called Preston immediately. He was on rotation at the hospital, but promised to come by after his shift. "Don't worry, Grandma," he said. "We'll figure something out." The rehabilitation center wasn't terrible, but it wasn't home. The walls were an institutional beige, the food bland and predictable. My roommate Chantilly snored loudly and kept the television on game shows all day. But the physical therapists were kind, and I was determined to recover quickly. The wedding was approaching, and I had every intention of dancing with my grandson. One afternoon, I was resting after a particularly challenging therapy session when I heard Preston's voice in the hallway. He must have arrived early for his visit. I was about to call out when I realized he wasn't alone. Ava was with him, and they were arguing in hushed tones. "Preston, the invitations have already gone out," Ava was saying, her voice tense. "We can't change the venue now just to accommodate your grandmother." "I know, but the country club has all those stairs, and with her hip, the wedding is in 6 weeks. Your grandmother will still be using a walker at best. Do you really want her hobbling down the aisle? It would completely throw off the ceremony." "Timing!" There was a pause, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for Preston to defend me. Instead, I heard him sigh. "You're right," he said. "It wouldn't be fair to ask everyone to change their plans. Maybe it's better if she doesn't come. It would be too difficult for her anyway." I had been planning this surprise for months. Despite my financial limitations, I had managed to set aside a small sum each month since Preston started medical school. It wasn't much compared to what I had already given him, but this wasn't about money. It was about legacy. My mother's jewelry collection had survived 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and my own financial hardships. I had kept it locked away in a safety deposit box at Riverside Trust Bank, refusing to sell it even during the most difficult times. The pieces weren't particularly valuable in monetary terms, no flawless diamonds or rare gems, but they told our family's story through the generations. There was a delicate pearl necklace my grandfather had given my grandmother on their wedding day in 1920, a gold locket containing tiny portraits of my parents as young lovers, a sapphire brooch that had belonged to my great-aunt, who had been one of the first female physicians in our state, something I thought would be especially meaningful to Preston as he began his medical career. "These are for your bride," I had practiced saying. "And for your daughters someday. Our family's history, our resilience, our love." The day before I fell and broke my hip, I had visited the bank to retrieve the collection. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The jewelry now sat in a hand-carved wooden box on my bedside table at the rehabilitation center, wrapped in midnight blue velvet and tied with a silver ribbon. I had written a letter to accompany it, expressing my pride in the man Preston had become and welcoming Ava into our family. It wasn't just the jewelry I planned to give them. After months of careful research and numerous phone calls, I had arranged something I believed would be truly special. My late husband John had always dreamed of having a family cabin by the lake, somewhere to gather for holidays and summer weekends. We never managed to make that dream a reality during his lifetime, but I had found a way. An old friend from my teaching days had a small lakeside property about 2 hours from the city. It wasn't fancy, just a modest 2-bedroom cabin with a dock and a stone fireplace, but it was charming and well-maintained. She had been looking to sell it to someone who would appreciate its character, rather than tear it down for a modern replacement. When I explained about Preston and Ava, she offered me a price well below market value and agreed to a payment plan that would stretch over 5 years. I had made the first payment and signed the papers 1 week before my accident. The deed, made out to Preston and Ava Wilson, was tucked into an envelope alongside a handwritten map showing the best fishing spots and hidden trails that John would have loved to explore with his grandson. The cabin would be my greatest gift to them. Not just a property, but a place for their future family to build memories. I imagined them spending weekends there, perhaps bringing their children someday. I could almost see Preston teaching a little boy or girl to skip stones across the water, just as John had taught him during our rare family vacations. Your grandfather would be so proud, I planned to tell him as I handed over the deed. This is from both of us. Now, listening to Preston and Ava discuss whether I should even attend their wedding, I felt a hollowness expand in my chest where anticipation had lived moments before. It's not just the stairs, Preston, Ava continued in the hallway, her voice lowered but still audible through the thin door. Your grandmother's appearance. She doesn't exactly fit with the aesthetic we're going for. What do you mean? Preston asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. The photographer is costing us a fortune. Every detail has been coordinated. The flowers, the dresses, even the table settings. Your grandmother will be in a walker or wheelchair. And no offense, but her clothes are dated. It would stand out in all the wrong ways. I glanced down at my faded nightgown and the institutional robe provided by the rehabilitation center. It was true that I hadn't bought new clothes in years. There were always more important things to spend money on. Preston's education, Preston's apartment, deposit, Preston's engagement ring. Maybe we could get her something new to wear, Preston suggested half-heartedly. Ava sighed. That's not the point. My parents are inviting everyone who matters in Riverside, Dad's business associates, Mom's charity board. These are people who could help your career. First impressions matter. So, what are you saying? That my grandmother doesn't make a good impression? There was a pause. I held my breath, waiting for Ava to backtrack, to say something kind. I'm saying that this day is supposed to be perfect. We've spent a fortune making sure it will be. Having your grandmother there in a wheelchair, possibly needing assistance, drawing attention, it changes the whole dynamic from elegant celebration to something else. I expected Preston to defend me. To remind Ava that without my sacrifices, he wouldn't be a doctor now. That without my savings, the diamond on her finger would be considerably smaller. That I was his only living family. Instead, after a long pause, I heard him say, "You're right. It would be easier for everyone if she didn't come. We can visit her here before we leave for the honeymoon, bring her some cake." Exactly, Ava said, relief evident in her voice. Much more dignified for her, really. And we can have the photographer take some nice pictures of us in our wedding clothes visiting her. That would make a sweet addition to the album. showing our compassionate side. "We'll need a good reason, though," Preston murmured. "She's been talking about the wedding for months. Just tell her the venue isn't accessible, or that her doctor's advised against it. She'll understand." "Yeah," Preston agreed. "She always understands." The voices faded as they moved down the hall. I sat frozen in my bed, the box of family jewelry suddenly heavy in my hands. The property deed seemed to burn through the envelope. On my bedside table, all my plans, all my sacrifices, all my dreams of witnessing Preston's special day, reduced to an inconvenience, an aesthetic problem to be solved. For the first time since John died, I allowed myself to cry openly, my tears falling onto the velvet-wrapped box that held generations of my family's love. Not the silent, private tears I had shed when selling our home or when working through pain to earn extra money for Preston's textbooks. These were deep, body-shaking sobs that came from a place I had kept carefully guarded, the place that had always feared this very moment of realization. In the next bed, Chantilly stirred from her nap. "You all right over there, Gabrielle?" I quickly wiped my eyes. "Yes," I lied. "Just thinking about my grandson's wedding. It's coming up soon." "That's nice," she said, already reaching for the television remote. "Family is everything, isn't it?" I nodded, not trusting my voice, as the weight of my triumph turned to ashes in my hands. The next morning, I was scheduled for my regular physical therapy session. I hadn't slept well, my mind replaying Preston and Ava's conversation in an endless loop. Each time I heard Preston agree that I shouldn't attend his wedding, the pain intensified, as if my broken hip was nothing compared to my fractured heart. "You're distracted today, Gabrielle," my physical therapist Marcus observed as I struggled with exercises I had mastered days ago. "Everything all right?" "Just tired," I replied, forcing a smile. Marcus was about to respond when the rehabilitation center's administrator appeared in the doorway. Her expression was grave, and she carried a folder I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Wilson, could I speak with you privately when you're finished here?" Something in her tone made my stomach tighten. "Is something wrong with my insurance?" She hesitated. "It's better if we discuss this in my office." Marcus helped me back into my wheelchair, and the administrator, Mrs. Blackwell, wheeled me down the hallway to her office. The room was small but neat, with certificates hanging on the walls and family photos carefully arranged on her desk. "Mrs. Wilson, I've received a call from your insurance company," she began, opening the folder. "There seems to be an issue with your coverage." "What kind of issue?" My voice sounded distant, even to my own ears. "According to their records, you canceled your supplemental Medicare policy 8 months ago." I nodded slowly. "That's right. I needed the money for something important." Mrs. Blackwell's expression softened. "I understand, but without that supplemental coverage, your basic Medicare only covers 80% of your rehabilitation stay. The remaining 20%, plus certain uncovered services, amounts to—" She turned a paper toward me, pointing to a figure that made my vision blur. $14,782.50. "There must be some mistake," I whispered. "I'm afraid not. And this figure will continue to grow the longer you stay with us." I stared at the number, my mind racing. My small pension was barely enough to cover my apartment rent. I had emptied my savings for Preston's engagement ring. The only asset I had left was the first installment I'd paid on the lake cabin. "What happens if I can't pay?" I asked. My voice barely audible, Mrs. Blackwell shifted uncomfortably. "We would need to discuss alternative arrangements. Perhaps a family member could assist? Preston, my only family. The grandson who didn't want his grandmother's walker ruining his wedding photos." "I'll figure something out," I said, straightening my shoulders despite the pain. But as Mrs. Blackwell wheeled me back to my room, another problem presented itself. A maintenance worker was placing my belongings into boxes. "What's happening?" I asked, alarmed. Your roommate Chantilly contracted a resistant infection yesterday, Mrs. Blackwell explained. We need to move you to prevent exposure, especially given your recent surgery. Move me where? We're at full capacity, so we've arranged for you to share a room with another patient. It's temporary, just until Chantilly's condition improves or a private room becomes available. My new room was at the opposite end of the facility, further from the nurse's station and the physical therapy room. My new roommate, Dorothea, was in her 80s and suffering from advanced dementia. She called me Margaret and repeatedly asked when her husband was coming to take her home. Her husband, I later learned from a nurse, had been dead for 15 years. That evening, as I attempted to settle in amid Dorothea's restless wandering and confused muttering, my phone rang. It was Preston. Grandma, how are you feeling today? His voice was cheerful, as if the conversation I'd overheard had never happened. I've been better, I replied truthfully. They moved me to a different room. Oh? Is it nicer? I glanced at Dorothea, who was currently trying to put her slippers in the small refrigerator. Not exactly. Well, I'm sure it's fine. Listen, Grandma, I wanted to talk to you about the wedding. Here it comes, I thought. Ava and I have been discussing the logistics, and we're concerned about your comfort. The venue has quite a few stairs, and with your hip still healing. I closed my eyes, feeling a strange sense of detachment as he delivered the rehearsed speech I had already heard through the door. The venue wasn't accessible. The day would be long and tiring. They were thinking of my well-being. We thought it might be better if you focused on your recovery instead of pushing yourself to attend, Preston concluded. We can come visit you before we leave for our honeymoon, bring you some cake, maybe even wear our wedding clothes for some nice photos. Word for word what they had planned. I wondered if I should tell him I'd overheard everything, his fiancée's concern about the aesthetic, his easy agreement that I was a burden. But what would that accomplish? He would deny it, apologize, make excuses. Nothing would change. Grandma, are you still there? Yes, I said quietly. I understand, Preston. You're not upset? It's your wedding. You should have it exactly as you want it. I could hear his relief through the phone. I knew you'd understand. You always do. That's why you're the best, Grandma. After we hung up, I sat in my wheelchair by the window, watching darkness fall over the rehabilitation center's small garden. Dorothea had finally settled into an uneasy sleep, her breathing shallow and irregular. I thought about all the times I had understood, when Preston forgot my birthday but needed money for a spring break trip, when he promised to help me move but canceled at the last minute because Ava had tickets to a concert, when he said he was too busy with residency to visit me in the hospital after my cataract surgery. I had always made excuses for him. He was busy. He was young. He had his own life to live. Wasn't that what I had sacrificed for, his freedom to pursue his dreams? But as I sat there in the growing darkness, another realization began to take shape. My sacrifices hadn't given Preston freedom. They had taught him that my needs didn't matter, that I existed only to serve his ambitions. That love flowed in one direction. My phone buzzed with a text. It was from the rehabilitation center's billing department, reminding me of an appointment the next day to discuss my payment options. In that moment, with Dorothea's confused murmurings in the background and the weight of my financial reality pressing down, something inside me, something that had been bending for years, finally broke. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to feel angry, not just disappointed or hurt, but genuinely, righteously angry. At Preston, at myself, at the system that made an elderly woman choose between health insurance and helping her grandson. As I sat there, clutching my phone with its reminder of debts I couldn't pay, a call came through from an unfamiliar number. Absently, I answered. Mrs. Wilson? This is Diana Lawrence from Riverside Trust Bank. I'm calling about the safety deposit box you recently accessed. Is something wrong? I asked, my mind already overwhelmed with problems. Not wrong, exactly. When you visited last week, you mentioned wanting to update your contact information. In reviewing your account, I noticed your box contains several items that our insurance doesn't fully cover. Given their potential value, I wanted to suggest our premium protection plan. Potential value? I repeated, confused. Yes. The jewelry collection you showed me? Our appraiser happened to be in the branch that day and noticed the sapphire brooch while you were handling the items. He believes it may be quite valuable, possibly an unsigned Fabergé piece from the early 1900s. If that's the case, you might want to consider additional security options. I gripped the phone tighter, my mind racing. My great-aunt's brooch. Valuable? It had always been treated as a sentimental piece, nothing more. How valuable? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. If it's authentic, potentially in the mid-5 figures. Of course, a formal appraisal would be necessary to confirm. 5 figures. Enough to cover my medical bills. Enough to maintain my dignity. As I thanked Diana and ended the call, I looked at the wooden box sitting on my nightstand. The jewelry collection I had planned to give Preston and Ava as a wedding gift. My family's legacy, my final offering in array. The darkness of my new room, with Dorothea's confused muttering providing a strange soundtrack. I made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, I asked one of the nurses, Lucia, if she could help me make a few calls. She was the kindest of the staff, always taking an extra moment to ask how I was really feeling, noticing, when I left my meals untouched. Of course, Mrs. Wilson. Who do you need to reach? A jewelry appraiser, I said. And after that, I'd like to contact my friend Barbara about a property matter. Lucia raised an eyebrow but didn't pry. She helped me arrange an appointment with a reputable appraiser who agreed to visit the rehabilitation center the following day. Then she dialed Barbara's number and stepped out to give me privacy. Gabrielle! Barbara exclaimed when she heard my voice. I was just thinking about you. How's the recovery going? Slower than I'd like, I admitted. Barbara, I need to ask you something about the cabin. Is everything all right? Your first payment cleared just fine. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I'm facing some unexpected medical expenses. I'm wondering if the contract allows for a change of plans. What kind of change? If I needed to sell the cabin instead of giving it to my grandson, I said, my voice catching. Or if I could get a refund on my down payment. There was a long pause. Gabrielle, what's happened? You were so excited about surprising Preston. The concern in her voice nearly broke my composure. Barbara had known me for 40 years, since we taught together at Riverside Elementary. She had attended John's funeral, had listened to me brag about Preston's accomplishments over countless coffee dates. Things have changed, I said simply. I need to prioritize my own situation right now. Of course, Barbara said. The contract has a 90-day reconsideration clause. You could either get your money back or, well, you could keep the cabin for yourself. For myself? The thought had never occurred to me. Why not? Once you're recovered, it could be a nice place for you to spend time. The community around the lake is full of retirees. You might enjoy it. A place of my own. Not a gift for Preston, but a sanctuary for me. The idea was both foreign and oddly compelling. Let me think about it, I said. I'll call you after I've met with the appraiser. After hanging up, I asked Lucia if she could bring my laptop from my belongings. I hadn't used it much since being admitted, mostly to check email and occasionally video chat with Preston when he remembered our scheduled calls. Planning to do some online shopping? Lucia asked cheerfully as she set up the laptop on my adjustable table. Something like that, I replied. Once alone, I opened my email and searched for messages from Preston. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, some evidence that he cared more than he had shown recently. some justification for my decades of sacrifice. What I found instead was a thread from 3 months ago that I had somehow missed. Preston had emailed me about adding him as an authorized user on my credit card in case of emergency. I remembered approving this request. He had called it a precaution, a way to help me if I ever needed assistance with bills or online purchases. Curious, I logged into my bank account. The balance was lower than I expected, even considering my recent expenses. I clicked on recent transactions and felt my blood run cold. There were dozens of charges I didn't recognize. Restaurant bills far larger than anything I would spend. A charge for $945 at a designer boutique. Multiple withdrawals at ATMs I had never visited. With trembling fingers, I sorted the transactions by date. They had started shortly after I added Preston as an authorized user. Small amounts at first, $50 here, $75 there, gradually increasing in both frequency and size. The most recent charge had been 2 days ago. While I lay in a rehabilitation center bed worrying about my mounting medical bills, someone had used my credit card to pay $420 at a high-end liquor store. I stared at the screen, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. Preston wouldn't steal from me. There had to be another explanation. Perhaps it was fraud. Someone had stolen my card information. But deep down, I knew. Preston had the card. Preston had access. Preston had been systematically draining my already limited resources while I focused on healing. As if summoned by my distress, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Preston. "Grandma, good news? Found the perfect honeymoon resort in Bali. A little over budget, but worth it. Love you." Attached was a photo of a luxurious beach villa with a private infinity pool overlooking turquoise waters. The kind of accommodation that would cost thousands per night. I set the phone down gently, as if it might shatter, or perhaps as if I might shatter. In my peripheral vision, I could see Dorothea watching me with unusual clarity in her normally confused eyes. "Bad news?" she asked. "I'm not sure yet," I replied honestly. Just then, Lucia returned with a printout. "Mrs. Wilson, I have your physical therapy schedule for the next 2 weeks. Also, Dr. Patel mentioned you'll need at least 3 more weeks here before we can consider discharge to home with support services. 3 more weeks. At the current rate, that would add at least another $10,000 to my bill. Money I didn't have. Money that should have been there if not for Preston's betrayal. "Thank you," I said automatically. After Lucia left, I reopened my email with new purpose. This time, I searched for anything related to the wedding. Preston had included me on some of the early planning emails before I'd fallen and broken my hip. One thread caught my eye, a discussion between Preston, Ava, and Ava's parents about the wedding registry. I scrolled through their exchange, noting the extravagant items they had selected: crystal stemware, fine china, Italian linens, a $100 to $200 espresso machine. At the end of the thread was a comment from Mike, Ava's father. "Don't forget to register. For a nice set of luggage, too. You'll need it for all the traveling you'll be doing with that wedding cash. Grandma Wilson alone should be good for at least $5,000, based on what you've told us about her generosity." Preston's reply made my hands shake. "More like $10,000 if I play my cards right. She's been saving her whole life for this. Plus there's some old jewelry she keeps talking about. Probably not worth much, but Ava might like it for the something. Old tradition? $10,000. He expected me to give him $10,000 I didn't have, on top of everything else I had already sacrificed, and the jewelry he so casually dismissed. The collection that represented 5 generations of my family's history, reduced to a superstitious tradition, its true value, both sentimental and monetary, completely ignored. I closed the laptop slowly, my mind surprisingly calm despite the overwhelming evidence of Preston's betrayal. It was as if some part of me had always known this day would come, had been preparing for it silently behind my conscious thoughts. Dorothea had drifted off to sleep, her breathing deep and regular, for once. In the quiet of our shared room, I reached for the wooden box containing my family's jewelry collection. The sapphire brooch gleamed as I lifted it, catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the window. My great-aunt had worn this piece while treating patients during the 1918 influenza pandemic, a woman of science and compassion who had defied convention to pursue her calling. What would she think of me now? Of how thoroughly I had allowed myself to be used? As I held the brooch, a memory surfaced. Something my mother had told me when I was very young. "Remember, Gabrielle?" she had said, fastening the very same brooch to my Sunday dress for a special occasion. "A woman must always keep something for herself. Something that's hers alone. That's not selfishness, it's survival." I had forgotten that lesson somewhere along the way, giving everything to Preston without reservation. But perhaps it wasn't too late to remember. I placed the brooch carefully back in its velvet nest and reached for my phone. It was time to make one more call. That night, sleep eluded me. Dorothea's occasional confused muttering provided a strange backdrop to my racing thoughts. I lay awake, replaying years of interactions with Preston, searching for the moment when things had shifted, when my beloved grandson had transformed from the vulnerable 7-year-old, clutching a blue dinosaur, into a man who could systematically exploit the woman who had raised him. Had there been signs I'd ignored? Red flags dismissed as youthful self-absorption? Or had I been complicit in creating this reality, teaching Preston through my endless sacrifices that my sole purpose was to fulfill his needs? By morning, my eyes were dry and burning, but my mind had achieved a strange clarity. The appraiser was scheduled to arrive at 10 a.m. Until then, I needed to sort through the complicated emotions competing for dominance in my heart. Betrayal was the sharpest, keen-edged, and precise. Not just because Preston had taken advantage of me financially, but because he had done so while dismissing my presence at his wedding as an inconvenience, an embarrassment. The depth of that rejection cut through decades of love and sacrifice. Like a surgeon's scalpel, clean and irreversible. Grief followed closely, a hollow, aching sensation that expanded with each breath. I was mourning not just the relationship I thought I had with my grandson, but the future I had imagined. Holidays at the lake cabin, great-grandchildren on my knee, the continuation of our small family. That future had been a mirage, as insubstantial as morning mist over water. Shame came next, insidious and familiar. Shame that I had been so blind, so easily manipulated. Shame that I had sold my wedding ring to pay for Preston's residency application fees while he had been charging luxury dinners to my credit card. Shame that I had believed myself loved when I was merely useful. But beneath these expected emotions lurked something more surprising: relief, a weight lifting, like heavy chains falling away. The exhausting effort of maintaining the fiction that Preston was the devoted grandson, that my sacrifices were meaningful and appreciated, that my aging body and modest means weren't sources of embarrassment to him. All of that could now be set aside. The truth, however painful, offered a kind of freedom, and with that freedom came the first tentative stirrings of anger. Not the destructive rage that consumes everything in its path, but the purifying fire that burns away pretense and illuminates boundaries. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I allowed myself to feel righteous indignation on my own behalf. "Morning, Mrs. Wilson," Lucia greeted, bringing in my breakfast tray. "You didn't sleep well, did you?" I managed a small smile. "Is it that obvious?" The eyes never lie. She adjusted my pillows so I could sit up more comfortably. "Everything okay?" "No," I answered honestly, "but perhaps it will be." After breakfast, I asked Lucia to help me dress in something more presentable than the hospital gown and robe I'd been wearing. From my small suitcase of belongings, she pulled out a simple blue blouse and cardigan. "This matches your eyes," she said approvingly. "It was my husband's favorite," I replied, running my fingers over the soft fabric. I haven't worn it I can't remember how long. As Lucia helped me dress, I caught sight of myself in the small mirror above the sink. I barely recognized the woman reflected there. Thin, pale, with silver hair that had lost its luster during my hospital stay. Dark circles shadowed eyes that had once been called vivid. Was this what Ava saw when she worried about wedding aesthetics? An old woman, diminished and faded. But as I looked closer, I noticed something else. A steadiness in my gaze that had been absent for too long. A quiet dignity returning, like groundwater slowly rising after a drought. "You know," I said to Lucia as she brushed my hair, "my husband John used to tell me I was the strongest person he knew. I thought he was being kind, but now I wonder if he saw something in me that I had forgotten." "Men can surprise you that way," Lucia agreed, her hands gentle on my shoulders. "Sometimes they see us more clearly than we see ourselves." At precisely 10 a.m., the reception desk called to inform me that Mr. Hargrove, the appraiser, had arrived. Lucia helped me into the wheelchair and pushed me to a small conference room the rehabilitation center had arranged for our meeting. Mr. Hargrove was a slight man with rimless glasses and meticulous hands. He set up his equipment with practiced efficiency: a jeweler's loupe, a small scale, various measuring tools, and a laptop. "Mrs. Wilson," he greeted me formally. "I understand you have some pieces you'd like evaluated?" I placed the wooden box on the table between us. "Yes, particularly this brooch." I carefully removed the sapphire piece and handed it to him. He examined it silently for several minutes, his expression giving nothing away. Finally, he looked up. "Mrs. Wilson, may I ask how you came to possess this piece?" "It belonged to my great-aunt Elizabeth. She was a physician in the early 1900s. "And do you have any documentation of its provenance?" I shook my head. "Only family stories. It was always treated as a sentimental heirloom, nothing more." Mr. Hargrove nodded thoughtfully. "I believe this is indeed an unmarked Fabergé piece, likely commissioned around 1910 to 1914. The workmanship is exceptional, the sapphire of remarkable quality. The setting shows the distinctive techniques of Fabergé's workshop, though without a maker's mark, which was not uncommon for some of their pieces." My heart began to race. What would such a piece be worth? At auction, with proper documentation and authentication. He hesitated, adjusting his glasses. "Conservative estimate would be $65,000 to $80,000, possibly more to the right collector." The room seemed to tilt slightly. $80,000? I whispered. "Would you like me to examine the other pieces as well?" In a daze, I nodded. One by one, Mr. Hargrove evaluated the items in my collection. While none were as valuable as the brooch, several were worth more than I had ever imagined. The pearl necklace approximately $3,000, a pair of Art Deco earrings around $5,000, the gold locket about $200 based on weight and craftsmanship. "Mrs. Wilson, you have a remarkable collection here," Mr. Hargrove said, carefully returning the pieces to their velvet beds. "Are you interested in selling?" The question hung in the air between us. Was I? These pieces represented my family's history, the legacy I had intended to pass down. Selling them felt like severing a connection to my past, to the women who had worn these jewels before me. But keeping them meant giving them to Preston and Ava, people who would never appreciate their true significance, who might sell them anyway without a second thought about what they represented. "I'm considering my options," I said finally. "How would the process work if I decided to sell?" Mr. Hargrove explained the authentication process, the auction procedures, the timeline. 6 to 8 weeks, potentially, before I would see any funds. Longer than I had before my medical bills came due. "Is there any way to expedite things?" I asked. "I have some pressing financial concerns." He considered for a moment. "There are private buyers who might offer immediate payment, though typically, at 60–70% of auction value. I could make some inquiries if you're interested. Even at reduced value, the collection would more than cover my medical expenses, with enough left over to maintain my independence for years to come. The realization was dizzying. After Mr. Hargrove left, promising to send a formal appraisal report within days, I sat alone in the conference room, the jewelry box open before me. Each piece seemed to hold not just monetary value, but the whispers of the women who had owned them before me, their hopes, their sacrifices, their resilience. My great-aunt Elizabeth had faced ridicule and hostility to become a physician when few women dared enter the profession. My grandmother had survived the loss of 2 children and a husband in the Great War, rebuilding her life through sheer determination. My mother had worked 2 jobs after my father's early death to ensure I could attend college. Strong women, proud women, women who had faced adversity with dignity intact. And here was I, their descendant, at a crossroads. I could continue as I had been, the self-sacrificing grandmother, giving everything to a grandson who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be drained. Or I could honor the legacy of these remarkable women by finally valuing myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Preston. "Grandma, hope you're feeling better. Quick question. How's your credit limit looking these days? Might need to put down some deposits for wedding stuff. Love you," I didn't reply. Instead, I closed the jewelry box with a soft but decisive click, like the final period at the end of a long sentence. That evening, back in my room with Dorothea, I made a list in my small notebook. On one side, I wrote for Preston. On the other, for me. Then I began to allocate the estimated value of each jewelry piece, along with my other limited assets. When I finished, I surprised myself. The column for me was longer, filled with entries like medical bills, apartment modifications, and even lake cabin. The column for Preston contained only one entry, lesson in consequences. Dorothea watched me from her bed, her eyes unusually lucid. "Making plans?" she asked. "Yes," I replied, closing the notebook. "I think I finally am." The next morning, fortified by a new sense of purpose, I asked Lucia if she could help me with something delicate. "Of course, Mrs. Wilson. What do you need?" "I'd like to contact my bank to report unauthorized credit card charges, and then I need to call my grandson's medical school." Lucia's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded. "Let me bring you the phone and some privacy." My first call was to the credit card company. The representative was sympathetic, but firm. I would need to file a police report if I wanted to dispute charges made by an authorized user. Was I prepared to potentially press charges against my own grandson? The question hung in the air, heavy with implication. Was I ready to take such a drastic step? To formalize Preston's betrayal in legal documents? To potentially create consequences that might follow him through his professional life? "Let me think about it," I told the representative. "In the meantime, I want to remove him as an authorized user and freeze the account." My next call was to the Alumni Affairs Office at Preston's medical school. Years of teaching had taught me that institutions keep detailed records of their donors, no matter how modest the contribution. "Hello, this is Gabrielle Wilson. I've been a regular contributor to the scholarship fund since my grandson, Preston. Wilson graduated in 2021. I'm calling to request a copy of my donation history for tax purposes." The friendly voice on the other end assured me they could email that information immediately. "We're always grateful for our consistent donors, Mrs. Wilson. Your support makes a real difference to our students." "Thank you," I replied. "Actually, while I have you on the line, could you confirm something for me? I believe my last donation was in December, is that correct?" "Let me check." There was a pause, the clicking of a keyboard. "Actually, Mrs. Wilson, we don't have any record of a donation from you since March of last year. That was the $500 contribution to the emergency medical fund." $500, the amount I had given Preston to donate on my behalf, telling How proud I was that he wanted to support other students following in his footsteps. The money had apparently never reached its intended destination. I see, I said quietly. Thank you for clarifying. After hanging up, I sat motionless for several minutes, absorbing this new information. It was one thing for Preston to use my credit card for his own expenses. I had, after all, made him an authorized user, however misguided that decision now seemed. But to take money explicitly intended for charity and divert it to his own purposes? That represented a deeper level of deception. My third call was to Barbara about the lake cabin. I've made a decision, I told her. I want to keep the property for myself. I'm so glad, Barbara's warm voice came through the line. But what about Preston's wedding gift? Plans change, I said simply. Could you recommend someone who could help make the cabin more accessible? I'll need modifications if I'm going to stay there during my recovery. Of course. My neighbor's son runs a contracting business that specializes in accessibility renovations. I'll send you his information. As I ended the call, a new text from Preston appeared. Hey, Grandma. Just checking. Did you get my message about the wedding deposits? Also, Ava's wondering if you have any update on when you might be giving us that family jewelry you mentioned? She's finalizing accessories for the big day. Love you tons. The casual entitlement of the message fueled my determination. I needed more information, more confirmation of patterns I was beginning to discern. But my resources were limited. Confined to this rehabilitation center, dependent on staff to help with basic tasks. That's when I noticed Dorothea watching me from her bed, her eyes clearer than I'd seen them since becoming her roommate. You look like a woman on a mission, she said, her voice surprisingly lucid. I suppose I am, I replied. Anything I can help with? I may be losing my marbles, but I've still got a few rolling around up here. She tapped her temple with a gnarled finger. Despite everything, I smiled. Actually, there might be. Do you know how to use a laptop? Dorothea snorted. I was a legal secretary for 42 years, young lady. I could type 120 words per minute before these fingers got twisted with arthritis. A laptop's just a fancy typewriter as far as I'm concerned. For the next hour, during one of her periods of clarity, Dorothea helped me navigate through my email archives and online accounts, her fingers still remarkably deft on the keyboard despite her claim of arthritis. Together, we created a spreadsheet documenting every financial interaction with Preston over the past 5 years. Gifts given, loans made, but never repaid, expenses covered. The total was staggering, well over $200,000, not including the cost of his undergraduate education, which I had covered through the sale of my home. This grandson of yours, Dorothea commented as the numbers added up. He's got expensive taste. He's marrying into a family with money, I explained. I think he's been trying to keep up appearances. On your dime, Dorothea observed bluntly. We continued our investigation, creating a separate document for Preston's broken promises. Visits never made, assistance never provided, commitments casually abandoned when something more appealing came along. You should check his social media, Dorothea suggested. See what he's been posting while charging all these fancy dinners to your card. I hesitated. I'm not sure I want to know. Knowledge is power, Gabrielle, Dorothea said, using my first name for the first time. Even when it hurts. She was right. Of course. With her help, I logged into Facebook, where I maintained a minimal presence mainly to see photos Preston occasionally shared. But I rarely browsed his timeline directly. The evidence there was even more damning than I had feared. While I pinched pennies in my small apartment, Preston and Ava had been enjoying weekends at beach resorts, dining at Michelin-starred restaurants, attending exclusive events, much of it, I now realized, funded through my credit card or loans, that were never intended to be repaid. More painful were the occasional references to me, always framed to cast Preston in the most flattering light. Visiting Grandma at her retirement community today? captioned beneath a photo where he was smiling widely while I looked thin and tired. The retirement community was my subsidized senior apartment building, and his visit had lasted exactly 22 minutes before he remembered an engagement with Ava's family. Another Sunday dinner with Grandma. Beneath a photo of a meal I had prepared despite my arthritis pain, using ingredients I could barely afford. What the photo didn't show was that Preston had arrived an hour late, spent most of the meal texting, and left immediately after eating, taking the leftovers I had planned to stretch into 3 more meals for myself. "What a performance," Dorothea muttered, scrolling through the carefully curated narrative of Preston as the devoted grandson. "It's not entirely his fault," I said, feeling a strange need to defend him despite everything. "I enabled this." "Nonsense," Dorothea replied sharply. "You loved him. There's a difference." Our investigation continued to Ava's social media accounts, which were public and meticulously maintained. There, the deception took on another dimension. In her carefully filtered world, Preston was portrayed as coming from a distinguished medical family. Technically true given my great-aunt's profession, but wildly misleading given our actual circumstances. More revealing were posts about their wedding planning, detailed updates about venues, flowers, catering, all described as generously provided by my amazing parents. No mention of the grandmother who had sold her wedding ring to help fund Preston's career, who had emptied her retirement account for Ava's engagement ring. But most illuminating was a private wedding planning group that Dorothea somehow managed to access, a digital space where Ava, her mother Christine, and various bridesmaids discussed the upcoming event in candid detail. "We need to finalize the seating chart," Christine had written 3 days earlier. "Preston, is your grandmother still insisting on attending?" Preston's response made my heart constrict. "Working on it. She's in a nursing home with a broken hip, so we have the perfect excuse to tell her it's not practical." Getting harder to keep her happy, though. She's starting to ask questions about the credit card. Might need to speed up the timeline on getting that jewelry collection before she gets suspicious. Ava had replied, "Just tell her you need it now for something old for the ceremony. Or better yet, say you want professional photos taken with the pieces before the wedding. She'll never say no to you." Christine's contribution was perhaps the most callous. "Once you're married and have control of whatever assets she has left, you can put her in a more affordable facility. No need to waste money on private rooms and physical therapy for someone her age." I stared at the screen, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. They were discussing my life, my future, my very existence as if I were a problem to be managed, a resource to be drained, and eventually, a burden to be discarded. "That's enough," I said quietly, turning away from the laptop. Dorothea closed the computer without comment. After a moment, she reached across from her wheelchair and took my hand in her gnarled one. "My Harold tried to do something similar before he died," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her rheumy eyes. "Tried to give our house to his gambling buddy instead of our daughter. Said Lucy wouldn't appreciate it properly." She gave a short, bitter laugh, as if appreciation pays the bills. "What did you do?" I asked. Dorothea's thin lips curved in a small, fierce smile. "I divorced him after 52 years of marriage, rewrote my will, and lived another 15 years out of pure spite." She squeezed my hand. "Best decision I ever made." For the first time in days, I felt a genuine laugh bubble up from somewhere deep inside. "Dorothea, I think fate knew exactly what it was doing when it made us roommates." "Damn right," she agreed. "Now what are you going to do with all this information?" I considered the question carefully. The evidence was irrefutable. Preston had been systematically taking advantage of me for years. He and his future in-laws were already planning to further reduce my circumstances after the wedding. They saw me as nothing more than a financial resource to be depleted and discarded. "I'm going to protect myself," I said finally, And then I'm going to teach my grandson the lesson I should have taught him long ago. Which is? I met her gaze steadily. That actions have consequences. The next morning, armed with new determination, I asked Lucia to help me make one more important call to my old friend and former colleague, Margaret Reynolds. Margaret had taught family law at the local community college after retiring from our elementary school. If anyone could help me understand my legal options, it would be her. Gabrielle. It's been too long, Margaret exclaimed when she answered. Barbara told me about your fall. How are you recovering? Physically or emotionally? I asked with a wry smile Lucia couldn't see. There was a brief pause. That doesn't sound promising. What's happening? I gave her the condensed version. Preston's exploitation, the credit card abuse, the wedding exclusion, the valuable jewelry, my mounting medical bills. Margaret listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of outrage. You visit tomorrow? I asked when I finished. I could use some professional advice and, frankly, a friendly face. I'll be there at 10 a.m., she promised. After the call, Lucia lingered, adjusting my pillows unnecessarily. Mrs. Wilson, I couldn't help overhearing. If you don't mind me asking, does your grandson know you've discovered what he's been doing? Not yet, I replied. Why do you ask? She hesitated. It's just, I've seen situations like this before. Once people realize you're onto them, they sometimes try to accelerate their plans. A chill ran through me. You think Preston might try to get the jewelry before I can secure it? I think you should consider moving your valuables somewhere safe, she said carefully. The hospital has a secure safe for patient valuables. As your nurse, I could arrange that for you today. The thought hadn't occurred to me that Preston might actually take the jewelry without my consent. But given everything I'd learned, I couldn't dismiss the possibility. Thank you, Lucia. I'd appreciate that very much. After Lucia secured my jewelry collection in the hospital safe, I turned my attention to another pressing matter, my bank accounts. Using my laptop, I systematically changed passwords, removed Preston as an authorized user on all accounts, and placed fraud alerts on my credit reports. The bank representative I spoke with suggested I make an appointment with their elder services specialist to discuss additional protections. We see this more often than you might think, Mrs. Wilson, she assured me. You're not alone. Not alone. The words echoed in my mind as I sat in my wheelchair by the window, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. For so long, I had defined myself by my relationship with Preston, grandmother, provider, supporter. Without that role, who was I? What remained of Gabrielle Wilson after decades of putting someone else's needs before my own? Dorothea interrupted my reflection. Your fancy doctor grandson called while you were in therapy, she announced. Said he's coming by this evening with his fiancée. Wanted to make sure you'd be here. She snorted. As if you could be anywhere else. Did he say why they're visiting? I asked, my pulse quickening. Something about wedding photos. Planning to show you their engagement pictures, he said. Dorothea gave me a knowing look. And he asked if you'd been going through any old family things lately. Subtle as a sledgehammer, that one. So Preston was making his move. Undoubtedly planning to charm me into handing over the jewelry collection tonight, perhaps worried by my silence about his credit card request. I had a few hours to prepare for their visit, to decide exactly how to handle this confrontation. Dorothea, I said slowly, would you be willing to help me with something? Depends. Is it legal? Her eyes twinkled mischievously. Perfectly. Legal. Just perhaps a bit theatrical. By the time Preston and Ava arrived that evening, our plan was in place. Dorothea had agreed to play along, and Lucia, finishing her shift, had promised to check in routinely during their visit. I had changed into my best outfit, a simple navy dress I saved for special occasions, and applied a touch of lipstick. If this was to be a performance, I intended to look the part. "Grandma!" Preston exclaimed, entering our room with a bouquet of grocery store flowers. Ava followed, her smile fixed and practiced. "You look great! How's the hip?" "Improving," I said, accepting his quick, perfunctory kiss on my cheek. "Hello, Ava. It's nice of you both to visit." "Of course," Ava replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "We've been so worried about you." Preston glanced at Dorothea, who was pretending to be engrossed in a game show on television. "Can we talk privately, Grandma? We brought something to show you." "Oh, don't mind me," Dorothea called out cheerfully. "My hearing aids turned off and I'm completely absorbed in Wheel of Fortune. You kids go right ahead." Preston looked dubious but proceeded to pull out a leather portfolio. "We got our engagement photos back. The photographer did an amazing job. We thought you'd like to see them." For the next 20 minutes, I admired professionally staged photos of Preston and Ava looking adoringly at each other in various picturesque settings: a botanical garden, a rustic bridge, a sun-dappled forest path. In each image, Ava's diamond ring was prominently displayed, the ring I had emptied my retirement account to purchase. "These are lovely," I said sincerely. Despite everything, they made a beautiful couple. "And we've been finalizing wedding details," Ava added, pulling out another folder. "We wanted to share some of the plans with you since—" She paused delicately. "Since you won't be able to attend in person." I nodded, maintaining my composure as they showed me elaborate floral arrangements, table settings with gold chargers, and crystal stemware. A 5-tier wedding cake adorned with sugar flowers that cost more than my monthly pension. "It's going to be perfect," Preston assured me, his hand covering mine. "We'll make sure to take lots of pictures so you can feel like you were there." "That's thoughtful," I murmured. There was a moment of awkward silence before Preston cleared. His throat. "So, Grandma, we were thinking about that family jewelry you mentioned a while back. Ava was hoping to incorporate something special into her wedding ensemble, for the something old tradition." "Ah, yes, the jewelry," I said, as if just remembering. "I was planning to give that to you as a wedding gift." Relief flooded Preston's face. "That would be perfect. Actually, if it's not too much trouble, we were hoping we could take it today. The jeweler needs time to clean everything properly, and Ava's stylist wants to plan her accessories. Plus," Ava added with a practiced smile, "it would mean so much to have these family heirlooms as part of our special day." I folded my hands in my lap, my expression thoughtful. That jewelry collection represents 5 generations of Wilson women. Each piece has a story, a history. "Exactly why it's so meaningful," Preston urged. Continuing the family tradition, I looked at him steadily. "Did you know my great-aunt Elizabeth wore the sapphire brooch while treating Spanish flu patients in 1918? She believed it gave her strength during dark times." Preston nodded impatiently. "That's a great story, Grandma. We'd make sure to mention that if anyone asks about it at the wedding. And the pearl necklace that survived 2 world wars hidden in the heel of my grandmother's boot when she fled Europe. She sold everything else but kept those pearls, saying they represented hope for the future." "So beautiful," Ava murmured, her eyes flicking to her watch. "Each piece represents a woman who faced adversity with dignity and courage," I continued. "Women who made difficult choices, who sometimes had to prioritize their own survival." "We totally respect that history," Preston assured me, leaning forward eagerly. "So, do you have the collection here, or—" "I had it here," I said carefully. "But yesterday, I had the most interesting conversation with a jewelry appraiser." Preston's smile faltered slightly. "An appraiser? Why would you need that?" "Curiosity, mainly. I'd always assumed the pieces were valuable only for their sentimental worth. Imagine my surprise when he informed me that the sapphire brooch alone is likely worth around $80,000. The color drained from Preston's face. Beside him, Ava went completely still. "80,000? Preston repeated. Apparently it's an unmarked Fabergé. Quite rare. I smiled pleasantly. The entire collection, he estimates, could fetch over 100,000 at auction. Preston and Ava exchanged a quick, charged look that confirmed everything I needed to know. Their interest in my family tradition had instantly transformed into naked calculation. That's amazing, Grandma, Preston said, recovering quickly. All the more reason why we should keep these pieces in the family. You wouldn't want to sell such meaningful heirlooms, would you? Actually, I said, meeting his gaze directly for perhaps the first time in years, that's exactly what I've decided to do. The stunned silence that followed was broken only by Dorothea's quiet chuckle from across the room. Sell? Preston finally managed, his voice cracking slightly. But Grandma, these are family heirlooms. They should stay in the family. I agree, I replied calmly. Unfortunately, it seems I don't have much family left. Preston's expression shifted from shock to confusion, then to a practiced concern. What are you talking about? You have me. You'll always have me. I studied his face, the face I had loved since he was 7 years old, the face I had memorized through every phase of childhood and adolescence, the face that now belonged to a stranger. Do I have you, Preston? I asked quietly. Or do I have someone who sees me as a walking ATM? Someone who uses my credit card without permission, who takes money meant for charity and keeps it for himself, who plans to put me in a more affordable facility after the wedding? His eyes widened in genuine alarm. Beside him, Ava had gone, completely rigid, her knuckles white where she gripped her designer purse. What are you talking about? Preston attempted a laugh that came out as more of a strangled cough. Grandma, has someone been filling your head with nonsense? You know how confused elderly patients can get in these places. It was textbook gaslighting, and from the confident way he delivered it, I suspected it wasn't the first time he had tried to make me doubt my own perceptions. I'm not confused, Preston. I've been blind, perhaps, but I'm seeing clearly now. I reached for my laptop, which I had positioned strategically nearby. Would you like to explain these credit card charges? Or perhaps these emails discussing how to get at least $10,000 from me for your wedding? Or maybe the wedding planning group where you and Ava discuss excluding me because I'd ruin your aesthetic with my walker? With each question, I turned the laptop screen toward them, displaying the evidence Dorothea and I had meticulously compiled. Preston's face cycled through shock, denial, and finally, a calculating assessment of how to regain control of the situation. Grandma, he began, his tone conciliatory, you're taking all of this out of context. Yes, I've used your card occasionally, but only for things I knew you'd want me to have. And those wedding discussions, we were just trying to spare you the difficulty of attending. The venue really isn't accessible, and we were concerned about your comfort. My comfort, I repeated, letting the words hang in the air between us. Not my dignity. Not my desire to see my only grandson married. My comfort. Ava jumped in, her public relations training evident in her smooth delivery. Gabrielle, we absolutely want you at the wedding. It's just that with your recovery, the timing is so difficult. If the ceremony were a few months later, or if the venue were different— If I were different, I interrupted gently. If I weren't old, if I weren't using a walker, if I weren't so embarrassingly beneath the social status you're trying to project. Preston's expression hardened, a glimpse of his true face showing through the mask of concern. That's not fair. We've gone out of our way to include you in everything. I visit you regularly. I call. I keep you updated on our lives. When was the last time you visited me before my accident? I asked. He hesitated, clearly trying to remember. Easter, he finally said, though the question in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. Easter was 4 months ago, Preston. And you stayed for exactly 35 minutes before remembering a dinner reservation with Ava's parents. I've been busy with my residency, he countered defensively. The hours are brutal. You know that. Not too busy for weekend trips to Napa Valley, I observed, gesturing to their engagement photos. Not too busy for dinner at Le Cirque, charged to my credit card while I ate microwaved soup to save money. A tense silence followed. Across the room, Dorothea had abandoned all pretense of watching television and was openly enjoying the confrontation, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Ava finally broke the silence, leaning forward with a practiced expression of empathy. Gabrielle, I can see you're upset, and you have every right to be if you feel we've been insensitive. Why don't we all take a step back and discuss this calmly? I'm sure there are compromises we can reach that will make everyone happy. Her tone was reasonable, conciliatory, the voice one might use to calm an irrational child. I recognized the tactic immediately. Minimize my concerns, paint me as emotional rather than logical, position herself as the mature mediator. What compromise do you suggest, Ava? I asked, genuinely curious about her approach. She smiled, clearly, relieved to be back in familiar negotiating territory. Well, regarding the jewelry, for instance, instead of selling pieces that have been in your family for generations, why not lend them to us for the wedding? I would be honored to wear them, and afterward you could decide their fate with a clearer head. It was artfully done, a proposal that sounded reasonable while still denying my agency and judgment. The implication was clear. Once I calmed down from this emotional outburst, I would naturally revert to my usual self-sacrificing role. That's an interesting suggestion, I said. But you see, I've already made arrangements with Mr. Hargrove, the appraiser. He's found a private buyer for the brooch who's willing to pay $70,000 immediately. The funds will cover my medical bills and support my independent living for quite some time. Preston's composure finally cracked. You can't do that. Those pieces were meant for me, for my family. They were meant for someone who would value what they represent, I corrected him gently. Not just their monetary worth. This is ridiculous, Preston snapped, standing abruptly. You're being manipulated by someone, that appraiser or someone here at the facility. The brooch can't possibly be worth that much, and even if it is, you can't just sell family heirlooms without consulting me. Actually, I can, I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. They belong to me, just as my credit card belongs to me, just as my life belongs to me. It was at that moment, seeing the naked entitlement in Preston's expression, the cold calculation in Ava's eyes, that something fundamental shifted inside me. A lifetime of conditioning, of prioritizing others' needs above my own, of measuring my worth through what I could provide to others, crumbled away like sand washed from shore. In its place arose something new yet ancient, a sense of self-sovereignty, of inherent value independent of what I could do for anyone else. I thought of my great-aunt Elizabeth, defying convention to become a physician. My grandmother, rebuilding her life after devastating losses. My mother, working 2 jobs to secure my education, strong women, proud women, my ancestors, my blood. Preston, I said, my voice soft but firm. I raised you. I loved you. I sacrificed for you. But I will not be erased by you. What is that supposed to mean? He demanded, his handsome features contorted with frustration. It means I'm reclaiming my life. The jewelry will be sold. The cabin I purchased, the one I planned to give you as a wedding gift, will remain mine. I've instructed the bank to close the credit card account you've been using and to investigate the charges you made without my permission. Ava gasped. A cabin? What cabin? Preston shot her a warning glance, but the damage was done. His face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You've always been dramatic, Grandma, but this is taking it too far, he said, attempting to regain control. You're not thinking clearly. The medication they have you on is minimal, I finished for him. Dr. Patel reduced my pain medication 3 days ago specifically so I could make major decisions with a clear head. This is ridiculous, Preston repeated, running a hand through his hair in frustration. You need me, Grandma. Who's going to take care of you when you leave this place? You can't even climb the stairs to your apartment anymore. It was the opening I had been waiting for, the moment to reveal the final piece of my plan. I won't be returning to that apartment, I said. I've given notice to the management. Once I'm discharged, I'll be moving to Barbara's Lake community to finish my recovery in the cabin I purchased. It's being modified for accessibility as we speak. But, Preston began, clearly struggling to process this sudden reversal of fortune. Margaret, Reynolds is helping me update my will and establishing a healthcare directive. I continued calmly. Lucia has put me in touch with a home healthcare service that can assist during my initial recovery. And Barbara has already introduced me to several neighbors my age who have formed a mutual support network. Preston stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. In a way, I suppose I was. The language of independence, of self-determination, of a woman who would no longer be defined solely by her relationship to others. You can't be serious, he finally managed. You're 73, Grandma. You can't just start over. I smiled, feeling a strange lightness in my chest. That's exactly what I'm doing, Preston. And do you know what? I think it might be the first truly selfish decision I've made in decades. Ava, ever the pragmatist, seemed to realize the situation had fundamentally changed. She placed a restraining hand on Preston's arm. We should go, she murmured. Give your grandmother some space to reconsider. Preston looked from her to me, clearly torn between anger and calculation. The jewelry collection represented a significant windfall he hadn't anticipated, one that was now slipping from his grasp. This isn't like you, Grandma, he said, making one final attempt. You've always put family first. Always. I still do, I replied quietly. But I've finally realized that I am part of that family too, and it's time I started treating myself with the same care and consideration I've always given others. As they gathered their belongings to leave, Preston paused at the door, his expression a complex mixture of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. So, that's it? He asked. After everything, you're just cutting me off? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken implications. Was I abandoning him as his parents had through death? Was I proving to be as conditional in my love as he had been in his? No, Preston, I said after a thoughtful pause. I'm not cutting you off. I'm establishing boundaries. Something I should have done long ago. My door will always be open to you, but on new terms. Terms that recognize my humanity as fully as yours. He shook his head slightly, as if the concept were incomprehensible. Then, without another word, he followed Ava out the door. After they left, Dorothea wheeled herself over to my side. Well done, Gabrielle, she said, her roomy eyes bright with approval. Well done indeed. I realized I was trembling, not with fear or regret, but with the enormous release of energy that comes when a burden carried too long is finally set down. I searched for the right word. Reborn. Dorothea nodded sagely. That's what happens when you finally decide to live your own life instead of someone else's. Takes most women too damn long to figure it out. I laughed, a genuine laugh. That seemed to come from someplace deep and previously untapped. Better late than never? Damn right, Dorothea agreed, patting my hand. Damn right. Margaret arrived promptly at 10 a.m. the next morning, her legal portfolio tucked under her arm. While Dorothea watched with interest, Margaret helped me complete power of attorney documents, healthcare directives, and a revised will that protected me from further exploitation. These legal protections are necessary, Margaret insisted. A man who discusses putting you in a more affordable facility cannot be trusted with your healthcare decisions. We were interrupted by Lucia announcing a visitor, Mike Hammond, Ava's father. He entered with the confident stride of a man accustomed to getting his way. Mrs. Wilson, he greeted me, barely acknowledging the others. I understand there might have been some miscommunication between you and Preston yesterday. His real purpose soon became apparent. Preston tells me you're planning to sell jewelry. That may be quite valuable. Jewelry that he expected to receive as a family inheritance. I studied him calmly. The jewelry belongs to me, Mr. Hammond. I'm free to sell it, keep it, or give it away as I see fit. Mike shifted strategies smoothly. Perhaps we could reach a compromise, a family partnership of sorts. With my business connections, I could help you maximize the value of these pieces. We could establish a trust for Preston and Ava's future children. It was a masterful pivot, acknowledging the jewelry's value while attempting to maintain family control over the assets. That's a generous offer, I replied, but I've already made arrangements with a qualified appraiser and secured a buyer for the most valuable piece. Frustration flickered across Mike's face. At least allow me to have my own appraiser take a look. Family jewelry is often undervalued by general appraisers. Margaret cleared her throat. Mr. Hammond, I'm Mrs. Wilson's legal representative. Any further discussion about her assets should be directed to me. Mike's demeanor cooled instantly. I wasn't aware Mrs. Wilson felt she needed legal representation for a family conversation. After he left, Margaret collected his business card with a derisive snort. Charming man. Used car salesman? Multiple dealerships, I confirmed. Very successful, according to Preston. And very interested in your jewelry collection, Dorothea added. Didn't even ask how you were feeling. I nodded, the final pieces falling into place. It was never about me attending the wedding. It was about controlling access to whatever resources I might have left. Soon after, Mr. Hargrove arrived with Ms. Elaine Winters, representing a private collector interested in the sapphire brooch. After examining the piece carefully, she confirmed its authenticity. Our client is prepared to offer $72,000 as discussed. The amount was slightly higher than initially estimated. I glanced at Margaret, who nodded approval. That would be acceptable, I replied. As we completed the transaction, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Loss mingled with liberation. The brooch had been in my family for generations, but in selling it, I was reclaiming my independence. After they departed, my phone rang. It was Preston, his voice full of forced cheerfulness. Grandma, I just wanted to check if you got my message. About meeting tomorrow. Mike said you two had a good talk. We did speak, I acknowledged. He seemed quite interested in my jewelry collection. Yes, exactly. We've been discussing options that could benefit everyone. That's thoughtful, Preston, I said evenly. But I've already sold the sapphire brooch. There was a moment of stunned silence before Preston exploded. You what? Grandma, how could you do that without consulting me? That was a family heirloom. His true motivations were now fully exposed. Not love or concern for my welfare, but what he could extract from me. I've contributed enough, Preston, I said softly. More than enough. It's time for you to stand on your own 2 feet, as I intend to stand on mine. As I ended the call, my hand trembled slightly, but my mind was clear and my heart strangely peaceful. The woman who had always sacrificed for others had finally learned to value herself. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of purposeful activity. With my medical bills settled, I focused on my recovery with renewed determination. Marcus, my physical therapist, noticed the change immediately. Whatever you're taking, I need some of it, he joked during our morning session. I've never seen someone your age progress this quickly after a hip fracture. It's not medication, I told him. It's motivation. Each day, I pushed myself harder. In therapy, graduated from wheelchair to walker, and began practicing short distances with just a cane. The pain was still present, but it no longer defined my experience. Dorothea's daughter Christine visited to take my measurements for a dress. Mom says this needs to make a statement, she said. What kind of statement did you have in mind? Considered carefully. Dignity? Strength? perhaps a touch of defiance. I can work with that, and we'll need to consider ease of movement with your walker or cane. A design that accommodates mobility aids without sacrificing elegance. Is that possible? I asked, uncertain. Christine looked up, her gaze direct and reassuring. Absolutely. Accessibility and beauty aren't mutually exclusive, Mrs. Wilson, despite what some people might have led you to believe. Meanwhile, Margaret had been investigating the wedding venue, the prestigious Lakeside Country Club where Ava's parents were members. The ceremony is scheduled for 2 p.m. in the Garden Pavilion, she reported. Reception to follow in the Grand Ballroom. I've reviewed the layout, and while it's not ideally accessible, it's manageable with assistance. Will I need an invitation? I asked, half joking. Margaret's expression turned mischievous. Actually, I took the liberty of calling the venue, posing as your assistant. I explained that there had been a confusion with your invitation, likely due to your hospitalization, and requested confirmation of your RSVP. You didn't, I gasped, equal parts horrified and impressed. I most certainly did, she replied with satisfaction. The event coordinator was quite concerned about the oversight. Apparently, the mother of the groom had personally handled the guest list, and your name was indeed included, though with a notation that you were unlikely to attend due to health concerns. Preston's mother has been dead for 23 years, I pointed out. Yes, I gathered there had been some creative adjustments to the family narrative. I worried about potentially causing a spectacle that might disrupt what should be a joyful occasion despite the circumstances. I don't want to ruin Preston's wedding day, I told Margaret. Your presence alone won't ruin anything, she assured me. You're his grandmother, attending his wedding with dignity and grace. If that creates discomfort for Preston and Ava, the issue lies with them, not you. Barbara offered another perspective. Think of it as closing a chapter, Gabrielle. You're not going to confront or accuse. You're simply bearing witness to this moment in Preston's life, acknowledging what was and what will now be. The practical details fell into place with surprising ease. Barbara would drive me to the venue and accompany me as my guest. Lucia arranged for my discharge from the rehabilitation center 3 days before the wedding, with home health care services to assist me at the lake cabin afterwards. 1 week before the wedding, Christine returned with the dress, a stunning, floor-length creation in rich emerald green with subtle gold accents. The design ingeniously accommodated my mobility challenges while emphasizing my best features. It's perfect, I breathed, seeing myself in the mirror. The woman reflected there wasn't the diminished creature I had glimpsed weeks earlier, but someone regal, dignified, and unexpectedly beautiful. One final touch, Christine said, presenting a small velvet box containing a simple gold pendant on a chain. Mom thought you might need something special to wear since you sold your jewelry, she explained. This was my grandmother's, Dorothea's mother. She'd want you to have it. The gesture brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I couldn't possibly— You can and you will, Dorothea interrupted firmly. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. But you're wearing it to that wedding, Gabrielle. No arguments. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp. Barbara arrived at noon, elegantly dressed in navy blue that complemented my emerald green. You look magnificent, she declared. Ready for this? I took a careful assessment of my emotional state. There was nervousness, certainly, but not the anxious flutter I had lived with for years. Instead, I felt a steady, grounded certainty in my right to be present. I'm ready, I replied, meaning it completely. The country club was impressive. Sprawling lawns, manicured gardens, a stately clubhouse overlooking a picturesque lake. As we approached the ceremony site, I could see guests gathering. Each step I took was deliberate, my posture as straight as my healing body allowed, my chin lifted with quiet dignity. Name, please? Asked the young woman at the check-in table. Gabrielle Wilson, I replied. Grandmother of the groom. Her head snapped up. Mrs. Wilson. Yes, of course. We've made special arrangements for you." To my surprise, she led us to a reserved section at the front, where immediate family would sit. A space had been left with a small note marked "Reserved for Mrs. Wilson." The coordinator looked confused. "Ms. Christine Hammond, the mother of the bride, specifically instructed us yesterday to reserve this for you." I exchanged a puzzled glance with Barbara. Had Preston or Ava had a change of heart? Or was this strategic management of appearances? Shortly after we were seated, Ava's mother approached, her expression a controlled mask of hospitality that didn't quite conceal her agitation. "Mrs. Wilson," she greeted me. "What a lovely surprise. We weren't sure you'd be able to attend given your health concerns." "My recovery has progressed remarkably well," I replied pleasantly. "I wouldn't have missed Preston's wedding for anything." Mike Hammond appeared at his wife's side, his expression shifting from concern to controlled surprise. "Mrs. Wilson, we didn't expect? That is, we're delighted you could make it." As they retreated, I could see them engaged in intense, hushed conversation, occasionally glancing back in my direction. "Round one to Gabrielle," Barbara murmured, barely suppressing a smile. The ceremony began. As the bridesmaids processed down the aisle, Preston spotted me. The change in his expression was immediate and dramatic. Shock, dismay, and something that might have been fear flashed across his face. For a brief moment, our eyes locked across the distance that separated us. Not just the physical space, but the emotional chasm that had opened between us. I offered a small, genuine smile, not of triumph or accusation, but of acknowledgement. "This is happening," the smile said. "I am here, bearing witness to your life as I have always done." Preston's gaze dropped first as he turned away. When the ceremony concluded, he deliberately avoided looking in my direction as he and Ava recessed down the aisle. At the reception, I noted that our place cards were at a table far from the head table, an intentional distance that didn't bother me as it once might have. My purpose wasn't to claim a privileged position in Preston's life, but simply to assert my right to exist in the same space. We had just taken our seats when Preston approached, his expression a complex mixture of anger, embarrassment, and forced control. "Grandma," he said tightly, "could I speak with you privately?" I rose carefully with my cane and followed him to a quiet corner of the terrace. "What are you doing here?" "We agreed you wouldn't attend." "No, Preston," I corrected gently. "You decided I wouldn't attend. I never agreed to that." "You're trying to embarrass me," he accused. "On my wedding day of all times." I regarded him steadily. "I'm here because I raised you. I love you despite everything, and I wanted to witness this important day in your life. My presence isn't about embarrassing you. It's about honoring my own place in your story." "With a walker? In that attention-grabbing dress?" He gestured dismissively at my emerald ensemble. "With a cane," I corrected, "which I need due to my hip fracture, and in a dress I chose because it makes me feel beautiful and dignified, just as you chose your tuxedo, and Ava chose her gown." Preston ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Why now, Grandma? After everything we discussed, why show up, unannounced?" It was the opening I had been waiting for. The moment to speak my truth directly, without anger, but with complete clarity. "Because I deserve to be here, Preston," I said simply. "I deserve to exist visibly in your life, not just as a source of financial support, but as a whole person with my own dignity and worth." "You've already caused a stir just by showing up," he muttered. "Ava's mother is having a fit." "I imagine she is," I acknowledged. "But that's not about my behavior. It's about expectations and control. I've broken the unspoken rule that I should remain conveniently invisible unless needed." Preston's expression hardened. "So this is revenge for not making you part of the wedding party? For not centering everything around your needs?" The twisting of reality was so profound I almost laughed. "No, Preston. This is me refusing to be erased. Nothing more, nothing less. Preston stood silently, his jaw working as he struggled to respond. Wedding guests mingled around us, occasionally glancing our way with undisguised curiosity. "Fine," he finally said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "You've made your point. You're here, you're visible, you've asserted yourself." The sarcasm stung, but I maintained my composure. "No, Preston. I'd just like acknowledgement, recognition, that I exist as more than an inconvenience or a resource. Look, you've put me in an impossible position. Ava's already upset that you're here after we told everyone you couldn't attend due to health reasons. I imagine a simple introduction would resolve much of the awkwardness," I suggested. "Acknowledge me as your grandmother. Thank me for making the effort to attend despite my recent surgery, and then we can move forward with the celebration." Preston stared at me as if I'd suggested something outrageous. "You want me to parade you around? Introduce you to Ava's family after you've deliberately disrupted our plans?" I sighed, feeling the weight of my years and this fractured relationship. "No, Preston. I just want to be treated with basic dignity and respect, the same courtesy you'd extend to any guest at your wedding." Ava appeared at his side, her bridal smile firmly in place, though her eyes betrayed her tension. "Preston, darling, the photographer wants us for family portraits." She turned to me with practiced graciousness. "Mrs. Wilson, what a surprise to see you recovered enough to attend." "Thank you, Ava. You make a beautiful bride," I replied sincerely. As they turned to leave, I added softly, "Preston, I have a small gift for you. Nothing extravagant, just something I thought you might appreciate. May I give it to you before I leave?" He hesitated, clearly torn between curiosity and continuing anger. "Fine. Find me before you go." After an hour of watching Preston and Ava greeting their many guests, I decided it was time to present my gift and take my leave. The day had been emotionally and physically taxing, and I had accomplished what I came to do: assert my presence with dignity while genuinely wishing the couple well. I found Preston near the cake table, momentarily separate from Ava. "Preston," I said quietly, "I wanted to give you my gift before leaving." He excused himself from his friends, his expression guarded. "You're leaving already? It's still early." The hint of relief in his voice was unmistakable. "It's been a long day for me, and I still have recovery to consider." From my small evening purse, I removed an envelope and handed it to him. "This isn't what I had originally planned to give you," I explained. "Those plans changed when I learned how you truly felt about me. But I wanted to offer something meaningful nonetheless." Preston took the envelope cautiously. "What is it?" "Open it when you have a moment alone," I suggested. "It's not money, if that's what you're wondering. It's something more valuable, at least to me." An awkward silence fell between us. Looking at this handsome young man in his wedding finery, I felt a complex swirl of emotions. Disappointment, yes, but also love, regret, and a strange sense of freedom. The weight of responsibility I had carried for years was lifting, allowing me to see Preston not as an extension of myself, but as a separate human being making his own choices. "I wish you and Ava every happiness, Preston," I said finally, meaning it despite everything. "I hope you build a fulfilling life together." He studied my face, perhaps searching for sarcasm. Finding none, his expression softened slightly. "Grandma, Ava's arrival interrupted whatever he had been about to say. "There you are, darling. The cake cutting is in 5 minutes and—" She stopped short, noticing me. "Oh, Mrs. Wilson." "I was just saying goodbye," I explained. "Thank you both for a lovely wedding." Ava's relief was palpable. "You're leaving? But it's so early." "I need to consider my recovery," I said, deliberately echoing their earlier excuse for excluding me. "Doctor's orders, you understand." With that, I made my way toward the exit, my steps measured and deliberate despite my fatigue. I refused to hurry or shuffle, maintaining the same dignity with which I had arrived. Barbara was waiting with the car. "Ready to go home?" she asked as she helped me into the passenger seat. "Yes," I replied, feeling both profound weariness and curious lightness. "I've said what needed to be said. The rest is up to Preston." As we drove away from the elegant country club, I found myself wondering what Preston would make of the envelope's contents when he finally opened it: a photograph of him at age 7 on the first night he came to live with me, and a key to a safe deposit box containing the journal I had kept since that day. The journal documented his growth, my hopes for his future, and eventually, my growing awareness of how our relationship had become unbalanced. My final entry read, "Preston, I hope someday you'll understand that true love sometimes means establishing boundaries. That genuine respect requires seeing the other person as they are, not just for what they can provide. I will always be your grandmother. My door will always be open to you. But from now on, it will be on terms that honor both of us." Whether he would grasp the meaning of this gift, I couldn't know. I had done what I could. The rest was beyond my control. "Are you all right, Gabrielle?" Barbara asked. I considered the question, taking stock of my emotional state. There was sadness, certainly, mourning for what might have been, but there was also a surprising sense of peace, of completion. "Yes," I answered truthfully. "For perhaps the first time in many years, I truly am." I had attended my grandson's wedding not as an invisible support or an inconvenience to be managed, but as myself, a woman of dignity and worth, claiming her rightful place in the narrative of her own life. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. 2 weeks after the wedding, I was settled comfortably in the lake cabin. Barbara and other neighbors had helped make the space accessible during my recovery, with grab bars in strategic locations and furniture arranged to accommodate my improving, but still limited mobility. The autumn colors were at their peak, painting the shoreline in brilliant reds and golds that reflected perfectly in the still morning water. I had developed a routine of gentle exercises followed by coffee on the small deck, where I could watch herons fishing in the shallows and listen to the rustle of falling leaves. On this particular morning, I was surprised by the sound of tires on gravel, an unexpected visitor turning into my driveway. Few people knew my new address, and I wasn't expecting deliveries. Through the kitchen window, I watched a sleek black car park beside my modest sedan. After a moment, Preston emerged, looking strangely out of place in this rustic setting with his designer coat and polished shoes. My heart quickened. I hadn't expected to see him again so soon, perhaps not for months or even years. Yet here he was, standing uncertainly in my driveway, glancing at the cabin with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. I didn't rush to the door. Instead, I took a moment to center myself, to remember the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish. Whatever his reason for coming, I wouldn't slip back into old patterns of prioritizing his needs above my own dignity. When I finally opened the door, Preston seemed startled, as if he'd been lost in thought. "Grandma," he said with an awkward half-wave, "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all," I replied, holding the door wider. "Would you like to come in? I've just made coffee." He followed me inside, his eyes taking in the cabin's simple, comfortable interior. "This is nice," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "Cozy." "It suits me," I replied, pouring him a cup of coffee. "How was the honeymoon?" "Bali was beautiful," he said automatically, then added with unexpected candor, "though there was some tension. Ava wasn't pleased about certain developments." I nodded, waiting for him to continue rather than rushing to ease his discomfort as I once would have. After a long moment, Preston reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the envelope I had given him at the wedding, now looking slightly worn, as if it had been opened and closed many times. "I found the safe deposit box," he said quietly. and read the journal. I set my coffee cup down carefully. I see. Why did you keep it all those years? He asked, his voice strangely vulnerable. All those details about my childhood, my accomplishments, even my mistakes. Because you mattered to me, I answered simply. Every part of you, every stage of your growth. It was important to me to remember it all. Preston stared into his coffee. The last entry, about boundaries and respect? I've been thinking about it a lot. And? He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for perhaps the first time in years. And I don't like what I see when I look at myself through your eyes. The person in those pages, especially the recent entries, isn't who I want to be. It was an admission I hadn't expected, a moment of genuine self-reflection rather than defensiveness or denial. The photo you included, he continued, pulling out the faded image of himself at 7, clutching the blue dinosaur. I'd forgotten how scared I was that first night, how you sat beside my bed until I fell asleep, promising you wouldn't leave. I remember, I said softly. You never did leave, did you? Even when I pushed you away, treated you like you were disposable. His voice caught on the last word. I was the one who left, in all the ways that mattered. The vulnerability in... His expression reminded me painfully of the child he had once been. Uncertain, seeking reassurance, afraid of abandonment. Yet he was not that child anymore, but a grown man responsible for his own choices, his own character. Why did you come? Today, Preston? I asked gently. He took a deep breath. To apologize. Not to make excuses or to ask for money or to convince you to forgive me. Just to say that I see now what I did, how I treated you, and I'm truly sorry. Preston's apology hung in the air between us. Sincere, yet incomplete. A beginning, rather. Then a resolution. I didn't rush to absolve him or to minimize the hurt his actions had caused. Instead, I acknowledged his words with a simple nod. Thank you for saying that, I said finally. Apology accepted. Relief flickered across his face, quickly followed by uncertainty. This was uncharted territory for both of us. A conversation, based on honesty rather than the careful dance of expectations and obligations that had defined our relationship for so long. I don't know where we go from here, Preston admitted, studying the grain of the wooden table. I can't undo what I've done. No, I agreed. None of us can change the past. But we can choose how we move forward. Outside the window, a blue heron landed gracefully at the water's edge, its reflection perfect in the still lake. We both watched it for a moment, appreciating the natural pause in our difficult conversation. I've been thinking about what you said at the wedding, Preston continued eventually, about refusing to be erased, about having dignity and worth beyond what you could provide for me. He hesitated. I didn't understand then. I'm not sure I fully understand now, but I'm trying. It was more self-awareness than I had expected, though I recognized that realization and genuine change were separate journeys. What about Ava? I asked. How does she feel about your visit today? Preston's expression tightened. She doesn't. No, things have been tense since we returned from the honeymoon. The wedding cost more than we anticipated, and without the financial help we expected. He trailed off, perhaps realizing how this sounded. You're facing financial challenges, I observed neutrally. Yes, he admitted. But that's not why I'm here. I swear it. I believed him, if only because his demeanor lacked the calculated charm he typically employed when seeking financial assistance. Instead, he seemed genuinely uncertain, even vulnerable. I think, I said carefully, that this might be an opportunity for you both. An opportunity? He looked confused. To build a marriage based on reality rather than expectations. To discover what you truly value and how you want to define success. I gestured to the modest cabin around us. I've found there's freedom in simplicity, in aligning your life with your actual resources, rather than constantly striving for more. Preston glanced around with new consideration. You seem happy here. Peaceful. I didn't expect that. I am, I confirmed. I'm creating a life that honors who I am now, my capabilities, my limitations, my desires, not performing a role for others' comfort or validation. I don't know if Ava would understand that perspective, Preston said doubtfully. Her parents have always measured success in very material terms. And what about you? I asked. How do you measure success? Preston? He seemed startled by the question, as if it had never occurred to him to define success on his own terms rather than accepting others' definitions. I'm not sure, he answered honestly. For so long, it's been about achieving certain markers: the medical degree, the right kind of wife, the proper social connections. I haven't really thought beyond that. The admission revealed how profoundly he had been shaped by external expectations, not unlike how I had allowed myself to be defined primarily through my role as his grandmother and provider. Perhaps that's your next challenge, I suggested. To discover what genuinely matters to you, what brings you fulfillment beyond status or appearances. Preston nodded slowly, considering this. I do love medicine, he said after a moment. Not for the prestige, but for the work itself. During my residency, I volunteered at a free clinic in the city. It was the most satisfying part of my training. But I set it aside when I met Ava because it didn't fit with the career trajectory her family valued. It was a small revelation, but significant. A glimpse of authentic passion beneath the polished surface he typically presented. What would it look like, I asked, to build a life around what genuinely matters to you, rather than what impresses others? The question seemed to both intrigue and unsettle him. I don't know, he admitted, but I think I'd like to find out. Our conversation continued for another hour, touching on his medical practice, my plans for the cabin, the community I was building at the lake. We didn't discuss financial matters or revisit past grievances. Instead, we began the delicate work of getting to know each other as we were now. Not grandmother and grandson defined by obligation and expectation, but two adults with separate lives who shared a complicated history and a potential future. Connection. When Preston finally rose to leave, he hesitated at the door. Can I visit again? He asked, the question holding none of the entitlement or assumption that would have characterized it in the past. Yes, I replied simply. I'd like that. As I watched his car disappear down the gravel drive, I felt neither the elation of complete reconciliation nor the heaviness of continued estrangement, but something more nuanced, a cautious optimism about the possibility of building a new kind of relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than dependency. In the weeks that followed, I focused on creating the life I wanted in my new home. With Barbara's help, I joined a local art class where I discovered a dormant talent for watercolor painting. I became part of a book club that met weekly at the community center. I volunteered at the lake's nature center, where my teaching background proved valuable in educational programs for visiting school groups. My hip continued to heal, and by early December, I had progressed from cane to occasional use of a walking stick on uneven terrain. Dr. Patel pronounced my recovery remarkable for someone your age, attributing my progress to consistent physical therapy and positive mental attitude. Preston called every Sunday afternoon, a new routine established. Without discussion, our conversations remained somewhat tentative but increasingly genuine. He shared challenges at work, occasional tensions with Ava's family, small triumphs with difficult patients. I told him about my painting progress, lake community events, books I was reading. We were building something new, not the uncomplicated closeness of the past, with its unbalanced sacrifices and unspoken expectations, but a more honest connection between two imperfect people learning to see each other clearly. One snowy December evening, As I was arranging pine boughs and candles for a simple holiday decoration, my phone rang. It was Preston, calling outside. Our usual Sunday schedule. "Grandma?" he said without preamble. "Ava and I have been talking. We've made some decisions I wanted to share with you." "Oh?" I settled into my favorite chair, curious about this unexpected call. "I've accepted a position at Community Medical Center in Riverside," he said. "It's a significant pay cut from the private practice I was planning to join, but the work is more meaningful. They serve patients regardless of ability to pay. And I'll be establishing a weekly clinic at the homeless shelter downtown." It was a surprising development, a step away from the prestigious career path he had been so focused on, toward something more aligned with the passion he had mentioned during our conversation at the cabin. "That sounds fulfilling," I said, genuinely pleased for him. "How does Ava feel about this change?" He sighed. Initially upset. Her parents definitely were. But we've had some hard conversations about what we really want from life. We've decided to sell the condo her parents helped us buy and move to a smaller place near the hospital. It's been clarifying. Clarifying, I repeated, understanding the weight of that simple word. Clarity often comes at a cost. The shedding of illusions, the surrender of comfortable expectations. Yes, Preston confirmed. Painful sometimes, but necessary. We're trying to build something real, something sustainable. It's harder than I expected, but also more, I don't know, authentic? I smiled at his choice of words, so similar to realizations I had come to myself in recent months. Authenticity usually is harder, I observed, and infinitely more worthwhile. "I'm learning that," he said. Slowly but surely. As we continued talking, snow fell softly outside my window, transforming the lake landscape into something new and beautiful, different from the autumn colors or summer greenery, but with its own distinct value and purpose. Like the changing seasons, Preston and I were finding our way into a new phase, not erasing the past, but not imprisoned by it either. Building something neither of us could have imagined when I sat in that rehabilitation center, overhearing his cruel dismissal of my presence at his wedding. Life rarely offers perfect resolutions or complete justice. Instead, it provides opportunities for adaptation, for innovation, for the creation of new paths when old ones prove unsustainable. I had attended my grandson's wedding, not just to assert my dignity, but to bear witness to a significant moment in a shared journey that had shaped us both. Now, we were writing the next chapter, separately yet connected, two distinct lives intersecting in ways that honored rather than diminished each other's humanity. 1 year later, the summer breeze carried the scent of lilacs through the open windows of my cabin. I stood at my easel, attempting to capture the particular quality of morning light on the lake, a challenge that had occupied my artistic efforts for weeks. My watercolors had progressed from tentative beginnings to increasingly confident expressions, though I remained perpetually unsatisfied with my ability to translate what my eyes perceived onto paper. "You're being too critical again," Barbara observed from her comfortable position on my porch swing. "That's beautiful work, Gabrielle." I stepped back, considering the painting with a professional eye. "The reflection isn't quite right. Water is the most difficult element to capture. Always changing, never still." "Rather like life itself," Barbara mused. I smiled at her philosophical turn. Indeed. My hip had healed completely months ago, though occasional twinges in damp weather reminded me of its vulnerability. I had abandoned the cane entirely, replacing it with daily walks along the lakeshore that kept my body strong and my mind clear. At 74, I had discovered a vitality I hadn't experienced in decades, not the boundless energy of youth, but a steady, purposeful engagement with each day. The cabin had evolved from a temporary refuge to a true home. bookshelves lined. One wall, filled with volumes I had always meant to read but never found time for. My small garden supplied herbs and vegetables through the summer months. The deck, expanded and fitted with a comfortable seating area, had become a gathering place for neighbors and friends. "Is everything ready for tomorrow?" Barbara asked, interrupting my artistic critique. "I think so," I replied, setting down my paintbrush. "The food is prepared, the spare room is set up, and Margaret is bringing extra chairs." Tomorrow would mark 1 year since Preston's wedding, a milestone I had decided to acknowledge with a small gathering. Not a celebration exactly, but a recognition of the profound changes that had unfolded in its wake. Preston and Ava would be coming, their first visit to the cabin together. In the month since our initial reconciliation, our relationship had evolved gradually, marked by weekly phone calls and occasional visits when Preston was in the area for work. We had established a new kind of connection, more honest, more balanced, and ultimately more sustainable than what had existed before. Ava remained somewhat reserved during our limited interactions, but the overt hostility had faded as she adjusted to the significant changes in their life together. Their move to a modest townhouse near Community Medical Center, their deliberate step away from the social circles her parents valued, had been challenging transitions. Yet Preston spoke of a growing partnership between them, forged through difficult conversations and shared purpose rather than external expectations. "Do you think they'll stay the night?" Barbara asked. "They've said they will," I replied, "though plans can change." My phone chimed with a text message. A photo from Dorothea at her Florida retirement community, showing her proudly holding a bowling trophy. "Look what this old bat can do," read her caption. I smiled, composing a quick congratulatory response. Dorothea. And I had maintained our friendship after my discharge from the rehabilitation center. Her daughter Christine had become my unofficial clothier, creating comfortable yet elegant outfits that accommodated my changing needs without sacrificing style. The gold pendant Dorothea had lent me for the wedding now held a permanent place in my jewelry box, a reminder of unexpected kinship found in difficult circumstances. "It's remarkable, isn't it?" Barbara observed, following her own train of thought. "How completely your life has transformed in just 1 year." I considered her words as I cleaned my paintbrushes. Yes, though the seeds were planted long before the wedding, I simply hadn't found the courage to nurture them. "What made the difference, do you think?" she asked. The question deserved careful consideration. What had finally propelled me from decades of self-sacrifice to genuine self-regard? From enabling dependency to establishing healthy boundaries? Necessity, I answered finally. And clarity. Hearing Preston and Ava discuss me as a burden, an inconvenience to be managed, it was painful, but also illuminating. Like having a bright light suddenly shine on patterns I had unconsciously maintained for years. Patterns can be comfortable even when they're harmful, Barbara agreed. Breaking them requires both awareness and will. And support, I added, smiling at my friend. I couldn't have made these changes without you, Margaret Dorothea. All the people who helped me see myself as worthy of respect and consideration. Thou. Afternoon passed in companionable conversation as we completed preparations for the next day's gathering. By evening, everything was ready. A simple but elegant meal prepared, the cabin tidied, flowers arranged in my grandmother's vases that I had reclaimed from storage. As darkness fell, I sat alone on the deck, watching fireflies illuminate the shoreline with their ephemeral glow. The quiet beauty of the scene invited reflection on the journey that had brought me here. Not just the physical relocation from my small apartment to this lakeside sanctuary, but the profound internal shift, from defining myself through service to others to recognizing my inherent worth. I thought of the sapphire brooch, now in some collector's possession. Its sale had provided the financial freedom that supported my independence, but more importantly, the act of selling it had represented a reclamation of my right to make decisions about my own resources. my own life. The next morning dawned clear and warm, perfect weather for hosting guests. Margaret arrived early to help with final arrangements, bringing freshly baked bread and her characteristic practical energy. "Nervous?" she asked as we arranged chairs on the deck. "A little," I admitted. "This is the first time Ava has visited, and the first anniversary of the wedding brings its own emotional complexities." Margaret nodded understanding. "Remember, this is your home. You set the tone." Preston and Ava arrived precisely at noon, their car pulling into the driveway with a crunch of gravel. I watched through the window as Preston retrieved a small overnight bag and what appeared to be a gift bag from the trunk. Ava smoothed her casual summer dress, looking slightly apprehensive as she surveyed the cabin. I met them at the door with genuine welcome. "I'm so glad you could come," I said, accepting Preston's embrace and Ava's more reserved handshake. "The drive was beautiful," Preston commented, glancing around appreciatively. "The lake is even more stunning in summer." Ava nodded agreement, her expression softening as she took in the comfortable interior with its large windows framing the water view. "You've created a lovely home here, Mrs. Wilson." "Gabrielle, please," I offered. "And thank you. It's evolved gradually to suit my needs and preferences." As we settled on the deck with cool drinks, the initial awkwardness slowly dissolved. Barbara and Margaret kept conversation flowing, sharing stories about lake community events and local history. Preston spoke about his work at the community hospital, the challenges and rewards of serving patients from diverse backgrounds. "I've started a diabetes management program at the homeless shelter," he explained, his eyes lighting up with genuine passion. "The resources are limited, but we're seeing real progress with consistent care and education." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely proud of this meaningful work. Ava, who had been relatively quiet, suddenly spoke up. "I've been helping with the administrative side," she offered, "developing tracking systems, applying for grants. It's different from what I imagined doing with my MBA, but surprisingly rewarding." It was the most animated I had seen her in my presence, a glimpse of authentic engagement rather than polite performance. "Different paths often lead to unexpected satisfactions," I observed. I certainly never imagined myself as a lakeside artist in my 70s. As the afternoon progressed, we shared the meal I had prepared. Nothing elaborate, but fresh and thoughtfully presented. Conversation flowed more naturally as we found common ground in discussing books, current events, and the challenges of adapting to life's unexpected turns. After dessert, Preston cleared his throat, suddenly looking nervous. "Actually, we have some news we wanted to share with you in person." He glanced at Ava, who gave a small nod of encouragement. "We're expecting a baby in January." The announcement hung in the air for a moment before I responded with genuine delight. "That's wonderful news. Congratulations to you both." "We're excited," Ava said, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. "And a little terrified. Honestly, it's all happening faster than we planned." "The best things often do," Barbara observed with a smile. "We've been talking about how we want to raise our child," Preston continued, his expression thoughtful. "The values we want to emphasize, the kind of family culture we hope to create." He met my eyes directly. "Your journal has been instructive in that regard, both for what to emulate and what to avoid." It was an honest acknowledgement of complex truths, that my parenting of Preston had contained both nurturing love and unhealthy patterns, strengths and significant weaknesses. "I hope you'll be part of our child's life," Preston added carefully, "on whatever terms work for all of us." The invitation was offered without presumption or entitlement, a genuine expression of desire for connection rather than an expectation of service or sacrifice. "I would like that very much," I replied simply. Later, as evening approached and we sat watching the sunset paint the lake in vivid hues, Preston handed me a small package wrapped in simple blue paper. "This isn't a grand gesture," he said as I carefully opened it. "Just something I thought should be returned to you." Inside lay my wedding ring, the one I had sold years ago to help fund Preston's residency applications. I looked up in surprise. "How did you find it?" "It took some detective work," he admitted. "I contacted the jewelry store where you sold it. They had records of who purchased it, and I was able to track it down and buy it back." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "It's not meant to erase anything that happened, just to acknowledge that some sacrifices should be recognized, even belatedly." I slipped the ring onto my finger, where it sat looser than it once had but still familiar after all these years. The simple gold band represented not just my marriage to John, but also a time when I had valued myself so little that I had parted with this treasured symbol to advance Preston's ambitions. "Thank you," I said softly. "This means a great deal to me." As darkness settled over the lake and stars appeared one by one in the clear summer sky, I felt a sense of completion, of circles closing and new ones beginning. The painful revelations of a year ago had initiated a journey none of us could have anticipated. Not just my physical relocation and newfound independence, but profound shifts in how Preston and Ava approached their marriage, their careers, their values. We had all been transformed, not into perfect people with perfect relationships, but into more authentic versions of ourselves, more honestly engaged with each other and with our own truth. The next morning, as Preston and Ava prepared to depart, Preston lingered on the porch while Ava placed their overnight bag in the car. "Thank you for yesterday," he said, "for welcoming us, for sharing this place with us." "I'm glad you came," I replied sincerely. He hesitated, then added quietly, "A year ago, I said some unforgivable things. I treated you as if your value depended entirely on what you could do for me. And now?" I prompted gently. "Now I understand that dignity isn't something anyone can grant or withhold from another person. It's inherent." He glanced out at the lake, then back to me. "You taught me that, not through lectures but by example, by refusing to be defined by how others saw you." It was perhaps the most profound acknowledgement he could have offered, recognition not just of his past mistakes, but of the essential truth I had finally embraced myself. As their car disappeared down the driveway, I returned to my easel and the partially completed watercolor. The morning light on the lake was different today, softer, more golden, revealing aspects of the water I hadn't noticed before. I began to paint again, not attempting to recapture yesterday's vision, but responding to what was before me now. The present moment with its own unique beauty, its own truth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.